After 3 years of silence, my granddaughter texted me, "Grandma, this Christmas could you send the gift in cash? It's more useful." I transferred it without a word. The next day, when she tried to get into the house, she had a surprise. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. I stared at my phone screen, reading the message for the third time. The words hadn't changed, but somehow I kept hoping they would. "Grandma, this Christmas can you just transfer the present money instead? It's more useful." No, "Hi Grandma." No, "How are you?" No, "I love you." Just a request for money, sent at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning like she was ordering something online. I set the phone down on my kitchen counter and looked around my house. The same house where Riley had spent every Christmas for the past 24 years. The same kitchen where I'd taught her to make sugar cookies when she was 7, flour in her dark hair and frosting on her nose. The same living room where she'd ripped open presents with such joy that my heart nearly burst watching her. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the phone again. Riley was 25 now, working at some marketing firm in the city, living in an apartment I'd helped her furnish after college. I'd raised her since she was 18 months old, after my daughter Sarah and her husband died in that car accident. The promise I'd made at their graveside echoed in my mind. "I'll love her like you would have. I'll give her everything." Maybe that was the problem. Maybe I'd given her too much. The Christmas tree in my living room suddenly looked ridiculous. I'd spent 2 days decorating it, the way I always did, with ornaments Riley had made in elementary school mixed with the expensive glass ones I'd collected over the years. Under the tree sat 3 carefully wrapped boxes: a cashmere scarf I'd seen her admire in a magazine, a vintage necklace that belonged to her mother, a gift card to her favorite spa, where she went every month but always complained about the cost. $600 worth of presents, but apparently she'd prefer the cash. I walked to my purse and pulled out my checkbook. The same checkbook I'd used to pay for her private school tuition when the public school wasn't good enough. The same one I'd used to cover her college expenses, her car payments, her security deposit on that apartment. How much had I spent over the years? I'd stopped counting after $50,000. But this felt different. This felt like the final straw, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Riley. "Thanks, Grandma. Can you make it 800? I saw this coat I really want." $800. For a coat? I thought about my own winter coat, hanging in the closet. I'd had it for 6 years. It was perfectly fine, still warm, but Riley would probably call it outdated, if she bothered to notice it at all. I sat down at my kitchen table and really looked at my house for the first time in months. When had I last bought something for myself that wasn't a necessity? When had I last gone out to dinner somewhere nice, or taken a trip, or done anything that was just for me? The answer came too easily. I couldn't remember. After Sarah died, my whole world became about Riley. Every decision, every purchase, every plan revolved around what was best for her. I'd retired early from my job at the insurance company to be available for school pickups and doctor appointments. I'd sold my condo in Florida that I'd planned to retire to, using the money instead to buy this bigger house with a yard where Riley could play. I dated a man named Frank for 2 years, but when Riley complained that he was weird and took up too much of my time, I'd ended it. Frank had been kind and funny, and he'd wanted to travel with me. But Riley came first. Riley always came first. Now I wondered what Frank was doing. Probably traveling with someone who put him first. The house felt too quiet suddenly. I realized I'd been living in silence for years, waiting for Riley's calls, organizing my life around her schedule, her needs, her wants. When had I become so small in my own life? I picked up the phone and opened my banking app. Riley's contact was already saved with my Touch ID approval for transfers. Of course it was. How many times had I sent money over the years? Emergency dental work, car repairs, a work outfit shopping spree, the down payment on furniture, rent when she was between jobs for 3 months. My finger hovered over the transfer button. $800. It wasn't that I couldn't afford it. I could. I'd lived frugally my entire life, saved every penny I could. But suddenly the idea of sending that money felt like giving away another piece of myself. I thought about calling her instead. Maybe hearing her voice would help. Maybe she'd ask about my day, or mention something she was grateful for, or tell me she missed me. But I knew better. Our phone calls had become transactional too. She'd call when she needed something and I'd give it to her, and then we'd hang up. Sometimes weeks would pass without contact. When had my granddaughter become a stranger who only saw me as an ATM? I transferred the $800 and immediately felt sick to my stomach. Not because of the money, but because I realized I just taught her that she could demand whatever she wanted from me, and I'd comply. My phone buzzed with her response. "You're the best. Love you." But the words felt hollow. Empty. Like something she thought she was supposed to say to keep the money flowing. I set the phone aside and walked to the window. My neighbor Mrs. Peterson was getting into her car, probably heading to her book club. She'd invited me to join months ago, but I'd said no because Riley might need me. Mrs. Peterson was 71 and busier than I was. She took art classes, volunteered at the animal shelter, and went on cruises with her sister. She lived for herself while still being a loving grandmother to her 4 grandchildren. What was the difference between us? Standing there in my kitchen, surrounded by the Christmas decorations I'd put up for someone who couldn't even be bothered to come see them, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something deeper and more final. It was the realization that I'd spent the last 24 years of my life enabling someone who saw me as nothing more than a resource to be used. And that was going to change. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I couldn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about that message, about the casual way Riley had asked for money like she was asking me to pass the salt. So I did what I always did when my mind wouldn't settle. I went to the photo albums. They were stored in the hall closet, 24 years of Riley's life documented in careful detail. I pulled out the earliest one and carried it to the kitchen table. The first photo stopped me cold. Riley at 18 months, the day she came to live with me permanently. She was wearing a little yellow dress, clutching a stuffed rabbit, her eyes huge and uncertain. I remembered that day so clearly. The social worker had explained that Riley might have trouble adjusting, that losing both parents so young could affect her ability to trust. I'd promised them all that she'd be loved, that she'd never want for anything. I kept that promise. Maybe too well. I flipped through the pages slowly. Riley's first day of kindergarten, me kneeling beside her at the school entrance, both of us nervous. Her 7th birthday party, where I'd rented a bounce house because all her friends had them. Christmas morning when she was 9. The living room so full of presents you could barely see the tree. But as I looked closer at the photos, I started to notice something else. In every picture I looked tired. Happy but tired. Even in the early ones, there were dark circles under my eyes, a slight slump to my shoulders. I'd been working full-time then at the insurance company, but I'd also been driving Riley to soccer practice, helping with homework, making elaborate Halloween costumes, organizing playdates. I'd been functioning on 4 hours of sleep a night for years, and it showed. I remember the conversation with my supervisor when Riley was 8. She'd needed surgery to remove her tonsils, and the recovery was supposed to take 2 weeks. I'd asked for the time off, explaining the situation. "Lori," he'd said gently, "maybe it's time to consider whether you can handle both a demanding job and raising a child at your age." I'd been 51 then. Not old but not young either. And he wasn't wrong. I was exhausted all the time, calling in sick when Riley was sick, leaving early for school events, coming in late after sleepless nights with a child who had nightmares. But I'd been offended by his suggestion. "I can handle it," I'd told him firmly. "Riley needs me." 2 years later I'd taken early retirement. The decision hadn't been entirely voluntary. Budget cuts were coming, and they'd offered attractive packages to older employees. I'd convinced myself it was perfect timing. Riley was 10 and needed more attention with her schoolwork. I could be more present, more available. What I'd really done was cut my retirement savings in half and committed to 24-hour-a-day childcare. I turned to a page from Riley's high school years. There she was at 16, dressed for prom in a dress that had cost me $400. She looked beautiful, but in the photo she wasn't smiling at the camera. She was looking at her phone. That had become the pattern by then. Riley was always looking at her phone, always somewhere else mentally, even when we were together. I'd tell myself it was normal teenage behavior, but the truth was more painful. I'd become background noise in her life. The The person who made sure everything ran smoothly so she didn't have to think about it. I found the photo from her high school graduation. She was holding her diploma, and I was standing beside her beaming with pride. She'd gotten into State University, and I was so proud I'd called everyone I knew. What the photo didn't show was the conversation we'd had that morning. I got accepted to Berkeley too, she'd mentioned casually over breakfast. My heart had stopped. Berkeley was her dream school, but it was also incredibly expensive. Riley, we talked about this. State University is a great school, and with the in-state tuition. I know, she'd said, not looking up from her phone. But Sarah Morrison is going to Berkeley. Her parents are paying for everything. The implied accusation hung in the air. Sarah Morrison's parents were both doctors. They could afford Berkeley. I was a retired insurance worker living on a fixed income. I'm doing my best, sweetheart, I'd said quietly. I know, she'd replied, but her tone suggested she thought my best wasn't quite good enough. I'd lain awake for weeks after that conversation, running numbers, considering options. I'd even looked into taking out a loan against the house. In the end, Riley had decided State University was fine, but I'd felt like I'd failed her somehow. I turned more pages. Riley's college years were documented too, but there were fewer photos of us together. More pictures of her with friends at parties on spring break trips I'd helped finance. I appeared mostly in the background or not at all. The last album was the most painful. Riley after college, living in her own apartment, starting her career. There were photos from our occasional dinners together, but even in those she looked distracted. Always checking her phone. Always somewhere else she needed to be. I closed the albums and sat in the quiet kitchen. When had I stopped being Riley's grandmother and become just her financial support system? The answer came to me gradually in pieces. It had been so subtle I'd barely noticed it happening. The birthday calls that became shorter and more perfunctory. The Christmas visits that turned into rushed stops between other plans. The conversations that focused only on what she needed or wanted, never on what I might be doing or feeling. I thought about my last birthday in August. Riley had sent a text. Happy birthday, Grandma. Sorry I can't make it today, work is crazy. Love you. No phone call. No card. No acknowledgement that I'd turned 67, and might have wanted to spend the day with the person I loved most in the world. I'd spent that birthday alone, telling myself she was just busy building her career, that I should be proud of her independence. But the truth was I'd felt forgotten. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Riley. Thanks again for the money. You should see this coat, it's amazing. I stared at the message. No questions about how I was doing. No mention of Christmas plans. Just gratitude for the money and excitement about something she'd bought with it. I thought about typing back, asking if she wanted to come for Christmas dinner, if she wanted to see the tree, if she missed our old traditions. But I didn't, because I was afraid of the answer. I was afraid she'd say no. Or worse, that she'd say yes but make it clear it was an obligation, something she was doing for me rather than because she wanted to. When had loving Riley become such a lonely experience? I put the photo albums away and went to bed, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I lay in the dark thinking about all the choices I'd made over the years. All the sacrifices that had seemed so necessary at the time. I'd given Riley everything I could, and somehow in the process I'd made myself disappear. The question now was whether it was too late to find myself again, and whether I had the courage to find out what would happen if I stopped being the grandmother who always said yes. The next few days passed in a strange fog. I found myself going through the motions of my normal routine, but everything felt different. The Christmas decorations that had brought me joy now seemed like props in a play nobody was coming to see. The carefully wrapped presents under the tree mocked me with their pointlessness. I kept replaying that text message in my mind. Can you just transfer the present money instead? It's more useful. The more I thought about it, the more those words stung. Useful. As if the thoughtfulness behind choosing gifts, the love behind wrapping them, the tradition behind giving them meant nothing compared to cold cash. I'd given her all of this access gradually, piece by piece, each decision seeming reasonable at the time. She needed a key in case I was sick and couldn't let her in. She needed to be on my bank account in case of a medical emergency. She needed my credit card for school supplies, for groceries when she was broke, for this, for that. Looking at the list now, I realized I'd essentially given a 25-year-old complete access to my life while getting nothing in return except increasingly rare and impersonal contact. My lawyer, Margaret Chen, arrived at 10. I'd used her services when I bought the house, and she remembered me well enough to fit me into her busy schedule on short notice. "What can I do for you, Lori?" she asked, settling into my living room chair with her briefcase. "I need to change my will," I said without preamble. "And I need to understand exactly what legal obligations I have to my granddaughter." Margaret raised an eyebrow but pulled out her notepad. "All right. Let's start with the will. What changes do you want to make?" I thought about this carefully. Currently, everything goes to Riley. I want to change that. I want to leave her something, but not everything. Maybe $10,000. The rest should go to charity. May I ask what prompted this decision? I could have given her a sanitized version, something about wanting to support good causes. Instead, I found myself telling her the truth. About the text message asking for cash instead of presents. About the social media posts where Riley mocked my loneliness. About 24 years of one-sided love and financial support. Margaret listened without judgment, taking notes. When I finished, she set down her pen. "Lori, I have to ask this as your attorney. Are you making this decision in anger? Because if you are, I'd recommend waiting a few weeks before making any permanent changes." I shook my head. "I'm not angry anymore. I was, but now I'm just done. I'm tired of being taken advantage of by someone who sees my love as a weakness." She nodded slowly. "In that case, yes, we can absolutely make these changes. You have no legal obligation to leave your granddaughter anything beyond what you choose to. And frankly, $10,000 is quite generous given what you've described." We spent the next hour going through the details. Margaret would draft new documents and have them ready for signing by the end of the week. She also helped me understand my rights regarding the bank account access and other financial ties. "You can remove her from your emergency contact list anytime," she explained. "And you should definitely change any passwords or account access she might have. You're under no obligation to provide financial support to an adult grandchild." After Margaret left, I called my bank. The conversation with my account manager, Patricia, was enlightening. "I'd like to remove my granddaughter from my emergency contact list and any account access," I explained. "Of course, Mrs. Henderson. May I ask if there's been any suspicious activity?" "Not suspicious exactly, but I've realized she has more access to my accounts than I'm comfortable with." Patricia pulled up my records. "I see she's made several transfers from your account over the past year. Large amounts. Are you aware of these?" I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean, transfers from my account?" "Well, it looks like she's been moving money from your savings to your checking, then withdrawing cash. The amounts range from $500 to $2,000. It's all technically legal since she's listed as an emergency contact with limited access, but..." I closed my eyes. "How much total?" "In the past year? Just over $12,000. $12,000. On top of all the direct transfers I'd made when she asked. Riley hadn't just been taking the money I gave her willingly. She'd been helping herself to more when I wasn't looking. "I want all of her access removed immediately," I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "Absolutely. I'll need you to come in to sign some forms, but we can have this done today." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. The casual theft was almost worse than the mockery I'd seen on social media. At least the Instagram post had been cruel honesty. This was just outright stealing. I drove to the bank in a daze, signed the papers, and changed all my passwords. Patricia was sympathetic but professional, explaining the security measures they'd put in place to prevent any future unauthorized access. "You might want to change the locks on your house too," she suggested. "If she's been taking liberties with your bank accounts, she might feel entitled to come and go as she pleases." I almost laughed. Already done. That afternoon I tackled the credit cards. 3 different companies had Riley's information on file for emergency use. I removed her from all of them and requested new cards with different numbers. Each customer service representative asked if the cards had been compromised. "Yes," I said. "They've been compromised by someone I trusted." By evening, Riley was effectively cut off from my financial life. She no longer had access to my house, my bank accounts, or my credit cards. For the first time in years, my money was completely my own. I should have felt guilty. The old Lori would have felt terrible about cutting off her granddaughter so completely. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. I made myself a nice dinner: salmon and asparagus, foods I loved but rarely bought because they were too expensive for one person. I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion and decided that reclaiming my life qualified. As I sat at my table, eating my delicious meal and sipping good wine, I thought about what came next. Riley would notice the changes soon enough. She'd try to use the credit card and it would be declined. She'd attempt to transfer money and find her access blocked. She'd come to the house and find the locks changed. I had no doubt she'd call me eventually, probably angry and demanding explanations. The old Lori would have caved, would have apologized and restored everything just to avoid conflict. But the old Lori was gone. In her place was a woman who'd finally learned that love shouldn't come with a price tag, and that generosity without gratitude is just enabling. My phone sat silent on the counter. No text from Riley asking how my day was, no calls just to chat. The silence used to make me sad, but tonight it felt peaceful. Tomorrow I decided I was going to do something I hadn't done in years. I was going to do something just for me. Maybe I'd drive to the coast. Maybe I'd visit that art museum I'd always wanted to see. Maybe I'd call Mrs. Peterson and ask about her book club. For the first time in 24 years, my time was completely my own. And it felt wonderful. Christmas Eve arrived gray and cold, with the kind of drizzle that makes everything look dreary. I'd spent the morning reading by the fireplace, something I used to love but hadn't done in years because I was always too busy worrying about Riley's needs or waiting for her calls. I was halfway through a mystery novel when I heard a car door slam outside. Through the window, I could see Riley's blue sedan parked in my driveway. She was walking toward the front door with the confident stride of someone who'd never doubted her welcome anywhere. I watched her reach for the door handle and try to turn it. When it didn't budge, she stepped back, looking confused. She tried again, then dug in her purse for her key, the key that no longer worked. I could see her face through the glass panel beside the door. Confusion turned to frustration as she jabbed the old key at the new lock repeatedly. Finally, she knocked. I didn't rush to answer. For the first time in 24 years, Riley was going to wait for me. When I finally opened the door, she was holding her phone, probably about to call me. "Grandma, what's wrong with my key?" she asked, pushing past me into the house like she always did. "Did you change the locks?" "Yes, I did." She stopped in the middle of my living room, finally looking at me instead of just assuming I'd follow her lead. "Why would you do that?" "Maybe you should sit down, Riley." "I don't want to sit down. I want to know why you changed the locks without telling me." I walked to my favorite chair and sat down myself. I changed them because I needed to make some changes in my life, starting with who has access to my home. Riley remained standing, her arms crossed. Even now, she was beautiful. 25 years old, tall like her mother had been, with thick dark hair and green eyes. But there was something in her expression I'd never really noticed before. Entitlement. The look of someone who'd never been told no. "That's ridiculous," she said. "What if you had an emergency? What if you fell and couldn't get to the door? Then I'd call 911 like any other adult." She stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "Grandma, you're acting really weird. Are you feeling okay?" "I'm feeling better than I have in years, actually." Riley's phone buzzed and she glanced at it, her attention already drifting. The old me would have felt hurt by that casual dismissal. The new me just felt confirmed in my decision. "Actually, Riley, we need to talk." "Can it wait? I'm supposed to meet Madison for drinks in an hour, and I need to stop by the ATM first." "The ATM?" Of course. She wasn't here to see me or spend Christmas Eve with me. She was here for money. "The ATM won't help you," I said quietly. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've removed your access to my bank accounts." For the first time since she'd arrived, Riley gave me her full attention. "You did what?" "I discovered that you've been taking money without asking. $12,000 in the past year, according to my bank." Riley's face flushed red. "That wasn't stealing. You gave me access for emergencies. Buying clothes and paying for vacations aren't emergencies, Riley. How do you know what I spent it on?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshot I'd taken of her Instagram conversation. Her face went white as she read her own words back to herself. You were spying on me? I was trying to understand why my granddaughter only contacted me when she needed money. Imagine my surprise when I found you bragging to your friends about how easy it is to manipulate your desperate grandmother. Riley snatched the phone from my hands, reading the conversation again. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to spin this in her favor. This was taken out of context, she said finally. I was just venting to a friend. Everyone complains about their family sometimes. Is that what you call it? Complaining. You're being dramatic. So I said some things I shouldn't have. People say stupid things when they're frustrated. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 67 years. Riley, do you love me at all? Or am I just a convenient source of funding? The question hung in the air between us. I realized I was holding my breath, despite everything that had happened, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Some part of me still hoped she'd say something that would prove I mattered to her. Instead, she rolled her eyes. Of course I love you. You're my grandmother. But you're being ridiculous about this whole thing. So I took some money without asking first. Big deal. It's not like you were using it for anything important. Not important to whom? To anyone. You just sit in this house doing nothing. At least when I use your money, it goes towards something fun. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. 24 years of sacrificing my dreams, my relationships, my retirement plans, and she saw it all as doing nothing. Get out, I said quietly. What? Get out of my house. Riley laughed, but there was no humor in it. Come on, Grandma. Stop being so dramatic. It's Christmas Eve. Yes, it is. And you came here for money, not to spend time with me. Just like always. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you asked how I was doing? When was the last time you showed any interest in my life that didn't involve what I could give you? Riley opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched between us. I thought so, I said. You can't answer because it's never happened. Not once in your adult life have you treated me like a person instead of an ATM. You're being unfair. I've been busy building my career. And I've been busy funding it. But that stops now. Riley's expression shifted from defensive to panicked. What do you mean? I mean, I've changed my will. I've removed you from my bank accounts. I've canceled the credit cards you had access to. I'm done being your personal finance department. You can't do this. I can, and I have. Riley paced to the window and back, her movements sharp and agitated. This is insane. You're my grandmother. You're supposed to take care of me. I did take care of you. For 24 years, I put your needs before my own. I gave up my retirement, my relationships, my dreams, all to make sure you never wanted for anything. And this is how you repay me. By stealing from me and mocking me to your friends. I wasn't mocking you. I held up my phone with the screenshot still visible. Really? Riley stared at the evidence of her own words, and for a moment, I thought I saw something like shame cross her face. But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Fine, she said, her voice cold. If that's how you want to be, fine. But don't come crying to me when you're lonely and have no one. Riley, I've been lonely for years. The difference is, now I'm not paying for the privilege. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door, then turned back one last time. You'll regret this, she said. When you're old and sick and have no one to take care of you, you'll regret cutting me off. I looked at this young woman I'd raised and loved and sacrificed everything for, and I felt nothing but sad clarity. The only thing I regret, I said quietly, is that it took me this long to realize that I deserve better than someone who only loves me for what I can give them. Riley slammed the door so hard the Christmas wreath fell off its hook. I picked it up, rehung it carefully and went back to my book. For the first time in years, Christmas Eve was peaceful. 6 months later, I was sitting on the deck of a cruise ship somewhere in the Mediterranean, watching the sun set over the coast of Italy. The woman next to me, Janet from Oregon, was showing me photos of her grandchildren on her phone. They're beautiful, I said, and meant it. They are, aren't they? My daughter says I spoil them when I visit, but that's what grandmothers are for, right? I smiled and nodded, but I was thinking about how different Janet's relationship with her family seemed from what mine had been with Riley. Janet talked about her grandchildren with pure joy, No underlying tension or resentment. She mentioned phone calls where they actually talked to each other, visits that were about spending time together rather than extracting resources. It had taken me 6 months to understand that what I'd had with Riley wasn't normal grandparent-grandchild relationship. It was a business arrangement disguised as family love. The first few weeks after Christmas had been hard. Not because I missed Riley exactly, but because I missed the idea of her. I missed having someone to worry about, someone to plan for. My days felt empty without the constant background hum of anxiety about her needs and wants. But then I'd started filling those days with things I actually enjoyed. I joined Mrs. Peterson's book club and discovered I loved discussing literature with other people. I'd taken that art class I'd always talked about and found I had a surprising talent for watercolors. I'd started volunteering at the animal shelter, where dogs and cats gave unconditional love without asking for credit card access in return. Most surprisingly, I'd reconnected with Frank. I'd found his number in my old address book and called him on a whim one Tuesday afternoon. When he answered, his voice warm and familiar, I'd almost hung up. "Lori? Is that really you?" "Hi, Frank. I know this is probably strange, calling after all this time." "Not strange at all. I've thought about you often. How are you? How's Riley?" The question I dreaded. But instead of making excuses or deflecting, I found myself telling him the truth. About the money demands, the social media mockery, the final confrontation on Christmas Eve. "I'm sorry," he'd said when I finished. "That must have been incredibly painful." It was. But also liberating. I spent so many years thinking I had to choose between you and her, but she never really chose me either. "Would you like to have dinner sometime? Just as friends, to catch up." That dinner had led to another, and another. Frank was 72 now, retired from his job as a high school principal, and living the kind of active retirement I'd always dreamed of. He traveled, he read. He had season tickets to the symphony. He'd never married after our relationship ended. And he told me that losing me had taught him not to settle for someone who didn't put him first. "I don't want to rush anything," he'd said after our third dinner. "But I'd like to see where this goes if you're interested." I was interested. More than interested. For the first time in my adult life, I was with someone who wanted to spend time with me for who I was, not what I could provide. The cruise had been his idea. "I've always wanted to see the Greek islands," he'd said. "Would you like to come with me?" The old Lori would have hesitated, worried about spending money on herself, concerned about what would happen if Riley needed her. The new Lori had booked her ticket the same day. Now, watching the Italian coastline drift by, I felt more content than I had in years. My phone buzzed with a text, and I glanced at it automatically. Riley's name appeared on the screen. I hadn't heard from her since Christmas Eve. Part of me had expected her to call and apologize, to realize that she'd pushed too far and try to repair our relationship. But the silence had stretched on, confirming what I'd already known. She'd only valued me for what I could give her, and when that stopped, I became worthless to her. The text read, "Grandma, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I wanted to reach out. I'm getting married in the fall and I'd love for you to be there. Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Frank looked over from his deck chair. "Everything okay?" I showed him the text. He read it, then looked at me carefully. "How do you feel about that?" "I'm not sure yet." "What's your gut telling you?" I thought about it. My first instinct was the old familiar flutter of hope. Maybe this meant she'd grown up, realized what she'd lost, wanted to make amends. Maybe the wedding was a chance for us to start over. But then I thought about the timing. Riley was getting married, which meant she probably needed money for the wedding. She'd been silent for 6 months, and now she suddenly wanted to talk right when she likely needed financial help again. "My gut is telling me this isn't about missing me," I said finally. Frank nodded. "What do you want to do?" I looked out at the endless blue water, thinking about the woman I'd become over these past months. The woman who'd learned to paint watercolor sunsets and discuss novels and dance with a kind man who thought she was wonderful exactly as she was. I typed back, "Congratulations on your engagement. I'll need to think about whether I'm available for the wedding. I hope you're happy." It wasn't yes, but it wasn't no either. It was something the old Lori never would have sent. A response that put my needs first. Riley's reply came quickly. "I understand if you're still upset about our fight. Maybe we could meet for lunch when you're ready? I really want you there. I noticed she called it our fight, as if we'd both been equally at fault. No acknowledgement of what she'd done, no real apology. Just the assumption that time would heal everything and we could go back to the way things were. I didn't respond. You don't have to decide anything right now, Frank said gently. I know, but I think I already have decided. She's only reaching out because she wants something. If she'd missed me, if she'd felt bad about how things ended, she would have called months ago. And that's okay with you? I considered the question seriously. Was it okay? For 24 years, my happiness had been tied to Riley's presence in my life. The idea of missing her wedding, of potentially never having a relationship with her again, should have devastated me. Instead, I felt something like relief. It is okay, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. She made her choice on Christmas Eve. She chose pride over love, money over family. I can't force her to value me, and I won't go back to begging for scraps of affection. Frank reached over and took my hand. I'm proud of you. That evening, as we dressed for dinner, I looked at myself in the mirror of our cruise ship cabin. I looked different than I had 6 months ago. Not younger exactly, but lighter somehow. The constant tension I'd carried for years was gone. The worry lines around my eyes had softened. I was wearing a new dress, blue silk that brought out my eyes. Frank had bought it for me in our last port, insisting that I deserved beautiful things. You look lovely, he said, coming up behind me and putting his hands on my shoulders. I feel lovely, I said, and realized it was true. At dinner, we sat with Janet and her husband Bill, along with 3 other couples we'd met on the cruise. The conversation was lively, full of laughter and stories and plans for future adventures. Nobody needed anything from me except my company. Nobody saw me as a resource to be mined. Later, dancing slowly on the ship's deck under a canopy of stars, Frank whispered in my ear, I love you, Lori. I love you too, I whispered back. It was the first time I'd said those words and meant them completely, without reservation or fear or the nagging worry that my love would be taken for granted. Riley had taught me a valuable lesson, though not the one she'd intended. She'd taught me that love without respect is worthless, that generosity without gratitude is just enabling, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. I was 67 years old and I was finally free to live my own life. And it was wonderful.